This is the Raising Rebellion podcast, episode number 25.
Welcome to the Raising Rebellion Parenting Podcast, where we will explore how to help kids seek purpose and passion, challenge society's expectations, and avoid a standardized life. Now here's your host, Paul H.K.
Hello, and thanks for being here. I'm Paul, your host. I love journalists, and I love teachers, and today is a great story about both of them. Maddie is a high school junior and co-editor of her school newspaper who was assigned to write a story about the recently hired new principal at her school. She began by collecting information, she interviewed the new principal, did some follow-up research, but soon started to feel that some things just weren't adding up. So she talked to her advisor, Mrs. Emily Smith, about it. Her peers then jumped in to report the story, and that began an experience that this team of reporters and their advisor will never forget. The Pittsburgh Six, as Emily calls them, would be tested throughout this process, having to step outside their comfort zones, question their own actions, and deal with pressure coming from all around them. But with the guidance of Mrs. Smith, they persisted and found the courage to pursue the truth, which ultimately led to the resignation of the new principal. I think you're going to love today's story about these truth-seeking rebels. So without further ado, here now is my interview with Maddie Baden and Emily Smith. Maddie Baden and Emily Smith, what a pleasure to talk to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Okay. Very excited today to talk to you guys. I want to talk all about your story. Let's start a little bit before this story even happened, if we could. Maddie, let's start with you. When you were growing up as a kid, what kinds of things did you like to do? Like, was writing something that you always enjoyed, or did you sort of find that later?
Well, as a kid, I didn't really write much. I was kind of into dancing and sports, and I didn't really write that much. And so whenever I got into high school, I'm the youngest of four. Mm-hmm. And so all of my other siblings have been through the journalism program and have been editors and have been with Mrs. Smith. And so I just thought, just carry on the tradition and get some more writing skills out of it, interview skills. And so that's just kind of how I got into the journalism program.
How interesting. Okay. Now, Emily, Mrs. Smith, tell me a little bit about your background. Can you tell me just sort of a quick, brief summary of how you came to become a teacher?
I don't know if I have a very good answer for that, but as a child, I grew up and spent a lot of time outside. I love to read, and I always wanted to travel. I didn't have the opportunity to travel until I was older, just because of some family circumstances. But because of experience I had in high school, I had a couple of teachers that were not very good teachers, and because of that, I had to help some classmates kind of understand Hamlet, and it came very easy to me, and they had no idea what was going on, and they had trouble with iambic pentameter. And from that, I found out that, I really liked helping people, and more so in an academic setting. And so I had always enjoyed journalism. I was on staff of Yearbook and Newspaper in high school, a very, very small high school. I had a graduating class of about 28. And when I went to college, I selected a school that had a major for education that was English and journalism. And so that's kind of how I ended up in the classroom.
Very cool. Very cool. Teachers are everything, aren't they? They could change your view on, like, if you think that you're not good at a given subject, a teacher that you connect with can just change that around, don't you think?
I would like to think so, but I think it would be interesting to hear a student perspective on that.
Maddie?
Yeah, I definitely feel, that they can change, anything that you feel like, especially like with a good teacher and, just kind of guiding you through and just always being there to help. And that's kind of what Smith has done. She just kind of through this process and through this story, even though she was kind of didn't help like didn't want to like help us a lot just because of like the circumstances, but she was always a good help, and you could always go to her, if you're ever feeling uneasy with the story or if you just kind of needed to talk about it. So it's always good to have a teacher that knows what they're doing and that loves what they do and helps with the kids a lot.
Right. Very cool. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the story. Maddie, were you the only one writing this story, or were you working with others and you were kind of the lead, or how was that working?
Well, first off, it was my assignment to do an introduction to the story before we found out all this information. So at that point, it was just me. But then once we found out all the information that was kind of, fishy, we brought in 5 other writers to help with it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when you prepare for writing a story, how do you do that? Do you start, like, let's say you're interviewing somebody, do you start by doing, background on that particular person and doing some research? How do you normally go about it?
Well, usually the first thing I do is whenever I get a story assigned, I kind of talk it over with, some of the other writers, if they know anything more about it. And if they don't, then I'll go take it upon myself to do some research. And, if I can't really find out anything about the topic or anything, then I'll just go ahead and contact the person that I need for the source. And then usually through the interview process is when I learn more about the story. And so that was kind of how this story went, because, no one really knew who she was, didn't really know much about her. So I kind of had to do the interview first to learn more about her.
Got it. So when you were doing the interview, is that when things started to not quite feel right, or was it after the interview, you think?
Well, during the interview, there were some questions that I asked that she was not very clear about. She didn't really answer my question. And so I just kind of went on with the interview. I didn't really think anything of it at the beginning. But, then after the interview, I was like, I still have some questions that I didn't really get answered. So I just kind of looked her up. And then whenever I looked her up, that's when kind of the red flag started to pop up. It said that she had violated some KHDA regulations at her school that she was at in Dubai. And so that's how we found a little more information about her, but not technically through her, but through other sources.
Right. Got it. So when all of these issues started to pop up for you, these red flags, at what point did you go to Mrs. Smith, and what did you tell her?
It was definitely right after, we searched her, me and another writer, it was during our lunchtime. And so we were just looking her up, and we were both kind of shocked by it. We're like, we didn't really know if we should tell someone about this, or, if it was just like a book or nothing. But we went straight to Mrs. Smith and told her, what should we do with this information? Should we include in the story? Should we ask her about it? And so that's what we did with that information.
Okay. And what did she tell you? I know she's sitting right there, but what did she tell you?
Well, after that, she told me, she's like, you should email her and maybe just ask her about maybe what happened so she can explain herself. And so that's what I did. I typed up an interview, and it was, I typed up an email. It was probably one of the scariest emails I had to type up because I really liked, the question, or I'm kind of shy in that way. So to send an email that was kind of questioning her, it was very difficult for me.
Right. I got it. Very courageous too, by the way, doing your job as an investigative reporter. That's awesome. So Emily, what was your thought when Maddie came to you? Like, were you just sort of going through the motions, saying, okay, well, this should be your process when you come up with these kinds of issues? These are the things you should do? Or do you think in your own mind, were you already thinking, something's not quite right here?
I think a little bit before Maddie had discovered the information, I was already aware of it and was kind of hoping and waiting for Maddie to find it, and she did. And when she came to me, I was kind of prepared already. One of the things that we talk about a lot is when you are writing a story, you need to make sure that you give every stakeholder the opportunity to have a chance to respond. So at that time, the only concern was, as Maddie had previously mentioned, were the KHDA violations. Mm-hmm. And so when she came to me, I told Maddie, I said, you have 3 questions that you need to ask her. And one of those was, can you explain a little bit about the situation that took place in Dubai about your school being closed down? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, being a small town in Pittsburgh and somebody coming from outside the country that's so exotic, people are going to be Googling her and looking things up, and that's what they're going to see. And we kind of thought if we could get ahead of that and explain the situation, it'll be old news by the time she gets here. Yeah. And so that was kind of the intent of asking that question along with a couple of others. And so and in addition to that, to reaching out to her and giving her the opportunity to explain the situation, Maddie was in constant contact with our superintendent, asking him questions about things. Because like I said, we don't strive, but we do give every stakeholder the opportunity, which is how it should always be.
Right, totally. So at what point did you guys go to the superintendent to keep him informed, to inform him about your findings? That's Destry Brown. Is that, did I get the name right?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. I actually had a meeting with him throughout this period of time because she had listed Collins University in Stockton, California as her place of graduation for her master's and PhD. Mm-hmm. And I was on the resume selection committee. We did basically three levels for the interviewing. So we reviewed application materials, which was essentially an online application, not like a resume or anything of that nature. And then the next round was a different committee interviewed the candidates, and then after that, students were able to interview the candidates. And so I was in the first round. So one of the questions that Maddie had asked originally was, where are your degrees from? And that was because there was not any information available. She had a very limited or pretty much non-existent digital footprint. Mm-hmm. She had a LinkedIn profile with her degrees listed, but no institutions, which was kind of curious in itself. Mm-hmm. So when Maddie asked her the direct question of where did you graduate from, that raised some concerns. And so based off of Maddie's answer that she got, and she told me, I went and looked through my notes to find what I had written. And when I looked up Collins University, it doesn't exist. So I initially met with the superintendent with my union rep as a concerned staff member to say, where do we go from here? And in that meeting, he said, it's not Collins University, it's Cortland's. And he said he already had her transcript and all of her paperwork and everything was fine. Mm-hmm. And so I came back the next day and I sat Maddie down, and that's when we pulled the 5 other students in. And I said, so it's not Collins, it's Cortland's. And I want you guys to look into it and tell me what you think. Mm-hmm. And I left the room and I gave them about 10 minutes among themselves to look things up and make a decision. And when I came back in, I said, what do you guys think? And with the biggest eyes you've ever seen on 6 innocent-faced kids, they said, we think we need to look this further.
I love it. Okay, so Maddie, I have a couple questions for you. First of all, tell me about the kinds of things you guys talked about in that 10-minute meeting between the 6 of you guys.
Well, we definitely talked about Cortland's University, and we all looked it up just separately, and we were all just like, did you find anything about it? Could you find anything that says it's a university? And neither of us could find anything. And so we're like, there's no phone number, there's no address, there's nowhere that says what state it is in, or there's no listed alumni for it, or so it was just very confusing. We're like, we just don't get it. Why would someone who is applied to be the principal say they're from this university when this information is so easily to look up, and we could find this information out that it is definitely not a real university.
Right. Okay, so red flags are flying. I want to go back to what you were saying before, how, when you went to talk to Mrs. Smith, and she was telling you, okay, we'll follow up, give her the opportunity to answer your questions, follow up with an email, and you were talking about how you felt a little bit weird that it was that you were really kind of questioning her answers there, right? I mean, it's a kind of a weird thing to question anything that anybody tells you, let alone somebody that's, older and of more seniority, et cetera. Did you have any kind of moments where you're like, I don't want to do this, I'm not going to do it? Or were you just kind of just nervous about it and you just plowed ahead?
I definitely had a lot of moments where I was kind of like, I don't really know if we should write this. What if all this information, that we found is just, I don't know, just
false.
Yeah. So we were kind of like, I was just kind of like, if she does turn out to be the principal, I'm involved in a lot of activities and I don't want her to be, have a grudge against me or anything.
Right,
and so there were many concerns of if we do write this, there's going to be a lot of people who are upset with us and look at us a lot differently.
Right. Totally.
The email that Maddie sent, that the email of her truly questioning the situation, was a real leap of faith for Maddie. And that was the moment that changed everything. And I mean, that honestly was a big moment for all of us. And I was incredibly proud of her because it was very courageous. It was very much outside of Maddie's comfort zone. When they got to that point of, we need some answers. And they were 3 simple questions. Can you tell us more about your company? Can you tell us where you graduated from? And can you tell us about the situation in Dubai? And that reaction is what basically tipped everybody off, because the way she answered the questions. And then after that first email, she had emailed Maddie back again and said, I don't like what you're asking me, and I don't feel like it's appropriate. And I'm forwarding all correspondence to the superintendent, and he is now the person that you should be speaking to. And first of all, in the state of Kansas, because she was under the impression that he would have the ultimate say of what could be printed in the paper. And, and of course, Maddie was very concerned that, he or she, had upset an authority figure. And I said, you have asked very simple questions that should have very simple answers. And, we talked a lot about what's right and, honesty and truth and how it's important. And, I just told her, I said, you have not overstepped any bounds. You have not been disrespectful. And, you just, I mean, she's perfect in every way. She's Maddie Baden. So out for the better.
So she was getting defensive, and her defensiveness actually probably tipped you off a little bit as well, right?
Well, the defensiveness was in the second email, but the first email, in the way that she answered the questions, it was very clear that she obviously had something to hide, and it was one of many red flags.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, now, did either of you get any kind of feedback from other people? Maybe some of the other writers on the piece, or, Emily, some of your peers, teachers, parents, maybe, saying don't, maybe you shouldn't do this.
Oh, people advising against doing it?
Yeah.
Basically every step of the way. I mean, I think, I would go home at night and I would be talking to my husband, and he would just be, looking at me with this very perplexed look on his face, and would be very quiet. And I was like, I can tell that you don't agree with this. And he was like, well, I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just very concerned. Yeah. And, I think throughout the process, I think I had to talk to each kid at one point or another and be like, you guys are doing the right thing. I know this is a huge leap of faith, and I know that it's definitely outside of all of our comfort zones, but the facts speak for themselves. I talked to multiple parents throughout the process because they were obviously concerned about things. And I myself was seeking advice and input. I mean, without Eric Thomas, our executive director at the Kansas Scholastic Press Association, without Frank Lamani at the Student Press Law Center in Washington, D.C., we would not have been able to do this story. And through their guidance and support, we were able to get to the point where, at that point, I had recused myself, and we had asked a local freelance journalist who is a Pittsburgh High School alum. She's a former Booster editor, Andrew Stefanoni, and she came in and met with the kids. And based off of her reaction, I think it just kind of solidified even more how important this story was for everybody involved. And and at the base of that was what they're doing mattered, and it mattered because what they had was truth and fact. And I think that at the end of the day, based off of everything that's happened, I think they made the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maddie, how about you? Were you getting any kind of feedback from people saying, maybe you shouldn't put yourself out there and risk it, because what if she still does get hired? It could possibly impact, like you said, all the different activities you were doing and your career in high school.
My parents were definitely kind of at the beginning towards all of this. When I told them what we have found, they're kind of like, just make sure you realize that, if she will be the principal, that something, she may not support the newspaper as much if you do write this story. And just because my family has been in the district for a long time, and so they're friends with a lot of the board members. And so they were just worried about what would happen if we did write it, and what we wrote, people would not agree with. And so they just had a lot of concerns. But then, towards the end, whenever it was published, they realized, that this was the right thing to do.
Right. Okay. Very cool. Now, so you guys, I understand, wrote right up until it was to the point of deadline, to the time it was ready to go to press. It goes to press and the paper's released. What kind of input did you guys get after the paper actually came out?
We were very excited to get to school the next day. And, within our student body, I think a lot of kids, more than normal, were reading it. I think a lot of the staff members were reading it. And there was kind of a little bit of a buzz at school on the day. And see, our paper goes out to the community, and it's also published online. We really kind of thought there would be more feedback, and it was actually kind of quiet on Friday. We were very nervous. And one of the editors emailed a PDF of the story and a PDF of the issue to local media, local TV station, local papers, even I think sent it to the Kansas City Star, and was kind of like, hey, would you read our story? And we think you should know about what's going on at Pittsburgh High School. And total radio silence all day. I think on Friday, the Kansas City Star reached out. Murray Williams from the Kansas City Star was like, I'm interested in writing about the kids who wrote the story, not about like what's going on. And so we were like, okay. And she kind of was the first one to lead the charge. And none of the local media responded until after the Kansas City Star printed on Tuesday. And then that night at that board meeting, when they had accepted her resignation, the Washington Post called that night, and their story was posted sometime during the night. And that's when, and that next day is when the local media was like, hey, we want to document that story, along with the New York Times and Good Morning America and CNN. So I guess we were worthy after that.
Wow. Okay. So the Kansas City Star piece, was that, it had to have talked about what the story was about. It must have been more than just about the kids, right? In order for all of that to start to blow up, no?
Well, I did talk to Murray on Friday, and she had interviewed with the kids. And actually what took so long for her article to come out is that she actually went behind the kids and fact-checked everything. She contacted all the same people that they had listed as sources and all the same institutions, and that was part of the reason why it took so long. An important piece of information that I left out on your previous question was our story printed on Friday. The next day was April 1st, and it was prom. And about 3:30 in the afternoon, the local paper prints a story online, and the headline is "Superintendent Refutes Claims in School Newspaper." And our superintendent went on record saying that there was a disgruntled employee because of an internal candidate did not get the job, and that basically all of the claims that the kids had about the difference between a BA and a BFA from the University of Tulsa was irrelevant to her getting a license, and that Coeur d'Alene's University is no longer accredited but had been accredited when she had attended there. And so that kind of definitely upped the stakes for everything. And I think that's part of what added to the buzz when after the Kansas City Star story came out, because it kind of, I don't know, I think it elevated the stakes, I think.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. Now, all of a sudden now you're getting all this national attention, right? New York Times, Washington Post, TV, Good Morning America. If I'm not mistaken, I think you guys also received a lot of praise from journalist organizations. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And what did they have to say?
Well, we had a reporter from the Topeka Capital Journal tweet about the story from the Kansas City Star. And he was retweeted by Todd Wallach of the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe. And
Wow.
we were all kind of fangirling and fanboying over the fact that he retweeted us.
Yeah.
Well, then tweeted us directly, and then that was kind of overwhelming. But we had lots of journalists. David Fahrenholt was another one that then he tweeted us, and it was overwhelming. I mean, we can't even keep up with all the people that have been so supportive. And most recently, the Huffington Post editor invited the kids and Eric and myself to attend the White House Correspondents' Dinner as their guest. So it's just been an amazing opportunity for all the kids.
That is, you guys went viral, as they say. Maddie, what was it like when you got the news that you had been invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner?
Well, I was at my house, and my sister, who was an editor for the paper 2 years ago, she just got home from college for a break. And so saw that Smith was trying to call me. So I was like, oh, okay. And so I had it on speaker, and she's like, well, what are you guys doing in 2 weeks and 2 weekends? I was like, well, I don't really know right now. She's like, well, you're invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I was like, oh my gosh. And so my sister, she was so jealous. She was like, oh my gosh, why can't this be me? And I was just screaming. I was so excited, and I just could not believe it.
Wow. That is incredible. Okay. I'm assuming you guys know who Dan Rather is. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I have such tremendous respect for Dan Rather. He's one of my favorite journalists.
Absolutely.
He defines news as what the public needs to know. That somewhere, someone in power doesn't want the public to know, and he calls that news, right? And he says that the primary role of journalists, I'm going to quote this here, is to constantly seek out the truth, or as close to the truth as one might get, no matter how uncomfortable that might be, especially for people in positions of power. And I would have to say that, both of you guys really lived up to that definition of journalism here, especially with the courage that it took in order to take those steps. I mean, it's really incredible what you guys have done just with this small piece, but sticking to your guns and with the integrity and approaching it in the way that you did was the right thing to do. So just really fantastic to see you guys do this. Maddie, do you think that this experience has changed your thoughts about journalism? Does it feel like something that you'd want to pursue a little bit deeper now, or do you think it's just sort of a step like it had been when you first started?
It's definitely changed my perspective a lot. Before, especially with going into it with a career, I've never really thought about it. It was just kind of join newspaper, just to get some more writing skills and just like that. And so definitely through all this experience, it's definitely, made me want to maybe look more into it and, see what else is out there.
Yeah.
And just also with journalism, it's just also changed, and especially student journalism, that, that people actually do listen to us. And just if we ever feel we found something that needs to be said, that we should definitely tell our story and not let anyone tell us, not to publish it, just to go with our gut and do it.
Right. And I would add to that, especially in today's environment of where people at the highest level of our government are attacking media and journalists. I think that probably adds so much to the fact that you guys had that courage to keep going. Just totally applaud you guys. Emily, how about you? With this experience, how has that changed anything for you being an advisor, a teacher, how you approach things? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I would say my new role is press secretary, handling all the requests and organizing things.
Totally.
It's been very humbling, and I'll tell you the same thing I've told everybody I've been interviewed by, as much as I've tried to avoid it. And, my kids are doing great things every day in this room, and they were doing what they should be doing and doing it at the caliber that they are able to operate at. And to me, they were just doing their job that they've been doing all year for the last several years. And I'm always proud of what my kids do. I think they're all, exceptional. And I just couldn't be more proud of all of them. But I think these six, the Pittsburgh Six, have definitely raised the bar of scholastic journalism, and I just think that is something they should be incredibly proud of. And throughout the process, watching them be so professional and humble, and it's just, I don't know. Like I said, to me, we're sitting here in my classroom, or in room 604 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and Maddie just finished a day of school and taking tests. They were studying for a test earlier, and I'm trying to get things ready for tomorrow, and life goes on here. We're still here doing what we do every day. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more pressure now to do something exceptional every day. And so I guess I better start having some breakfast or something so I can be more exceptional.
Right. You need that breakfast.
Yeah.
And I definitely, I'm glad you called out like the Pittsburgh Six, because definitely want to recognize, the rest of your team. And everybody that contributed to this story, the whole thing, applause goes out to everybody here. Okay, let me ask you guys one last question, if I could, so we can wrap it up. I know you guys got things to do. This podcast, I explore how adults can help kids find passions in life, right? How to go about doing that, and how do we help kids pursue those things, as opposed to just sending them through school and hoping for the best, right? What kinds of things can we do to help affect that? So what kind of advice can you give to parents who want to help their kids find things that they love to do in life? Emily, you want to go first?
Oh, I think that's an exceptionally hard question. I've been teaching for 9 years, and I've ran across so many different kinds of kids, and I actually have 2 kids of my own now. Mm-hmm. And it's been an interesting experience to see both sides of the spectrum. And I think that giving kids the opportunity to experience things and pushing them outside of their comfort zone into things that they might not think that they would like or would be interested in is probably some of the best advice I can give, because interestingly enough, when kids enroll into newspaper or yearbook or whatever, they'll be like, I want to be a writer, or I want to be a designer. And they get in and they hate it, and they pick up a camera and they don't look back. Mm-hmm. Or they start writing and and they just flourish. And it's fun to watch them blossom and realize that they do have a passion for something. And journalism is just one small piece of the pie of life that people could try to sample. And I think that sometimes we fall into our comfort zone as parents and as educators, and we don't think we have the ability to possibly change the trajectory of children or young adults. But, I sit here every day and I talk with these kids, and I treat them like young adults. I don't treat them like kids, because they don't magically become an adult when they turn 18 or they graduate high school. Those abilities that they should have to be an informed citizen, the ability to ask questions or to meet a deadline or to be responsible, that isn't a switch that's flicked overnight. And I think people think of it that way. And so throughout this process, I think it's been really hard for some people, for some adults, because they're always like, well, why didn't you just tell them no? And I say it doesn't work that way, because ultimately they are my kids and the newspaper is their baby. And so my job is to take care of them, and their job is to take care of the newspaper, and they decide what goes in there. And that's because, legally, from a standpoint, they're the ones that will be held legally responsible. But the other side of that is it's their product. And I want them to have the opportunity to learn, by mistakes and by triumphs. And I think that giving them that opportunity to be a stakeholder and to make a decision allows them to find a passion they didn't realize was there. Most of my kids are not going to be journalists, and I'm okay with that. And most of them are going into the medical field, or they're going into engineering, or they're going to be an attorney. But the skills that they've learned in here have guided them to where they're going to be, because they have found something that has sparked something within them. And a lot of times it's leadership, or it's how to work with a team, and they really thrive in an environment where they're surrounded by people. And sometimes it's more of a design aspect. But I think that at the end of the day, if you come home and you haven't failed in some way, or you haven't been challenged, then you kind of missed an opportunity to grow a little bit more as a person. So that's a very long answer to your question. So I'm sorry, but I feel very passionate about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer, great perspective. Loved it. Maddie, how about you?
Well, I definitely agree with the comfort zone, being pushed out of your comfort zone, because for me, once I sent that email, and just from that point, it was just a whirlwind. And so, if I never sent that email, I was like, oh, Smith, I don't really know what if she gets mad at me? But I was like, okay, I need to do it. And from that point, I've just learned, this is something that I really enjoy. And just through the whole experience, it's just been amazing. And so just being pushed out of that comfort zone is just something that was the best thing.
Totally agree. They say that life begins outside of your comfort zone, right? And that we are the sum of all of our experiences together. So that's kind of exactly what both you guys just said. Okay, well, I have a tremendous love of journalists and teachers of all kinds in life, which is why I really wanted to talk to you guys. I just think that those two are really the truth seekers, and without them in this world, we would honestly just be lost. So that's why I think I just absolutely love your story here. I want to thank you both for the work that you do and have done. And I really want to thank you both for taking the time to chat with me today. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Keep doing the great work you're doing. And will you please let me know if I can help you guys in any way in the future, because I'd love to help you guys however I can, if I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We appreciate the offer.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. Maddie Baden, Emily Smith, thank you both once again. Hope to speak with you guys again soon. By sharing these stories, my hope is that it provides you with information and perhaps some motivation to help you with your family's journey to raise your kids to take ownership in their future and to be courageous in living the lives that they want to live. The show notes for today's episode are over at raisingrebellion.com. And if you're enjoying the show, I'd of course appreciate it if you help spread the word or left a review over at iTunes to help others find the show as well. Very grateful as always for you being here. And until next time, go Rebs.